Okay, this is a trial and error type thing. I'm holding my camera in my hand, and I thought, since I've set the table rather pretty for Labor Day, as if it's going to be used for anything, I thought I'd let you get a close-up of today's table. Now, these are dishes that Jan bought me for my birthday a couple years ago, and they're called Blue Garland. I've never had the chance to really set a nice table with them because it didn't have the right tablecloth, didn't have the whatever I needed, the flowers, and it just didn't work. So today I decided everybody's starting to decorate for fall. Summer's not over yet as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to see if I can pull this a little closer so you can get a look at, let's see, right here. There's my table plates. See my little shot glass and the little berry bowl. Here's my pretty napkin. These are the napkins and the tablecloth that I bought this week in Jan's Antique Mall. I saw them, couldn't resist them. Had light blue trim embroidery on it, and I said, yep, that'll work with Jan dishes. So I'll move in a little bit more so you can see my teapot. I'm holding this from the side, so can't see too well what I'm doing, but I'll try to get it at another angle so you can see more of the table. Now, look at these pretty glasses. I used them because they got blue on them. Yeah, Goodwill find. I kind of like them. I only have 4 of them, but I never need 4 glasses. Nobody's sitting across the table from me anyway. Just for decorating. And of course, here's my Marlene. Here's my iced tea glass Fostoria. Yeah, I got a bunch of these. They always set a pretty table. I lit the candle. Let's see, over here we've got, I can get to it, yeah, my cream and sugar. That's my cream and sugar. It's so pretty. See? Can you see? Very pretty. I don't think there's anything else except my little greenery around the coffee pot. I didn't want a great big flower arrangement in the middle of the table and then have to set the coffee pot or teapot over to one side. I want it to be the centerpiece. So, there you're getting a view of my dining table, and probably the next time you see it decorated, it will have a few bright fall colors. Now I'm going to walk around. Just hope I don't fall over a box. And hope you don't see all my junk. Past the TV, yeah. That's Clint Eastwood, of course. I like Clint Eastwood. So I'm going to set my camera down on a little table in front of a chair. I get awfully tired of sitting on the couch all the time. So I've got to get it angled so it doesn't fall off. And I want it aimed right at me. So let's get it up here. I'm going to sit down and see if I've got the angle right. I'm going to tell you a story. So, I'm wearing my Eiffel Tower shirt. This is my favorite shirt. Thought I'd wear it for Labor Day. Not that it stands for anything, except that I wish I was in Paris. Don't we all? So, I'm wearing my blue glasses only because I need a pair that I can read with. They're not all strong enough. Take care of business here before I get started. Now, I got to tell you a little story. got to prepare you for this because I'm going to be reading from a book. And I'm going to be using this little light to shine on the book so I can see. Lots of things you have to do before you can read a book in these days and time. So, anyway, I think I've told you about my third great grandfather. I thought we'd have just a little history lesson today. I just jump back and forth from one subject to another and can't seem to get organized because I don't know in advance what kind of story I'm going to be telling. So today I'm going to talk about back after the Revolutionary War. My third great-grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War, and his marker is in the family cemetery up in Frog Level, Virginia, where my dad and my mother were raised. It's in my mother's family cemetery. That was done about 13 years ago. Yeah, I think it was that they couldn't find any signs of where he was buried, if he was buried, or anything. So the SAR, the Sons of the American Revolution, decided they would pick a burial spot, and so they came to our Brooks family cemetery and put his grave marker there, and they had ceremony. I was there. I don't know, there were 20 or 30 people there. Really a nice situation, and the Sons of the American Revolution do a really good job when it comes to working on the history of the people who served in the wars. So anyway, this story is about his sister. His sister's name was Susanna. I have to give you a little background before I get into the story itself. Susanna married Henry Livingston. Henry Livingston's parents had a 2,000-acre plantation in the Virginia, Tennessee area, Holston Hills. I don't have all of the names of the places and the rivers and the things. I didn't want to take the time to look all that up. But the story I'm going to tell you started out this way. I was on a website back when I was starting my genealogy and all that. You had websites. You didn't have all of these genealogy sites. People had their own family websites, and you could go on those websites. Well, this one that I got on was from Virginia. I was trying to remember the name of the man who owned this website. A lot of people joined in, and a lot of people would tell short stories. Some beautiful, funny, interesting stories from back in the olden time. And so the man that had the website, I thought, what was his name? Just couldn't think of it. Edgar. I picked up a book, and on the back of the book, it's talking about the author of the book, and the person who, to quote this person, it has his name, Edgar A. Howard. And I said, that's the man I've been trying to remember. It's on the back of the book. He didn't write the book. But one of the commenters on his site did write the book. Now, he was telling about what he was researching, And he came up with an Indian chief named Binge. I recognized the name, and he was trying to find out all he could about this Indian chief. He was a red-headed Indian, white, mostly white skin. Now I'm telling this story because this was a Cherokee Indian, and my family, as far as I know, were Caucasian. It has nothing to do with race. This is just a story of background history. That's what I want you to understand. It has nothing to do with races. So the man is telling about when Binge was on the uproar with his tribe, and I commented on something. I told him that my third great aunt was captured by Binge, and she and her sister-in-law, while they had been captured and they were going through the hills and through the woods, she was wearing an apron, and she would tear off little strips at the bottom of her apron and tie them to branches of bushes and trees to leave a trail, so that when the Holston militia came out looking for them, they would have something to go by. Now, I want to talk about the book. I could read you the whole book, but I'm going to read you just portions. This portion has to do with my third great aunt, Susanna, and her sister-in-law, Elizabeth. And I'm going to start reading, and I hope I may skip here and there because I don't want to make this too long. So if you like this kind of information, I think you will find this story interesting, especially when you know that one of your ancestors, was part of this. So I'm going to start reading, and I hope you like this. In the summer of 1791, Binge announced his plan to raid into his favorite hunting grounds in southwest Virginia. At Running Water Town, he called for volunteers, and 5 men agreed to accompany him. Fair Station guarded one of the most important intersections on the frontier. Now I want to go down to the part, I'm on the wrong page. Would you believe that? I didn't think that sounded familiar. Let's get to the right page. This is the page I wanted. It's called The Livingston Raid. In the late winter of 1794, Bob Binge said goodbye to his wife and children yet another time. He left their home in Lookout Mountain Town in North Georgia, filled with equal portions of his old hatred of the settlers of the Clinch and Holston valleys, and of his newly acquired disgust at what the warfare was doing to innocent children. He dropped over to Alabama to Wilson and picked up his brother, the Tail. Together they went by Running Water Town, where Binge had once lived with the Shawnee allies. Here they picked up a few trusty Cherokee. They did not pick up either Doublehead or any of the Shawnee. These were relatives. Along the way, Bob Binge was bothered by recurring dreams that told him to return home. Now I want to go on. Let me find the part I want here. Okay. going to go over another page. The first lot of False Dawn, April 6th, 1794, found Chief Bob Binge of Chickamauga, Cherokee, and 6 warriors resting behind the brow a little hill to the rear of the home of William Todd Livingston. This was the parents of Henry and Peter Livingston and their wives, Susanna and Elizabeth. Actually, William Todd had died in 1776, and the plantation was occupied by his widow, Sarah, and 2 of their sons, Peter and Henry, and their families. In 1784, certain heirs had relinquished land of the estate to Peter, and in 1786, the son Samuel had sold his part of his estate to the brothers. It goes on and tells that. It was a little before 10 in the morning. Peter and Henry left their house to go to a barn that was at some distance away. Sarah was working in her garden. Henry's wife, of only 3 weeks, Susanna, who was called Suki, was in an outbuilding with some of Peter and Elizabeth's children. Also within the farmyard were Elizabeth's sister Suki, a wench with her child, a Negro man belonging to Edward Callahan, and a Negro boy aged 8. Elizabeth, along with her children aged 10 and 2, and a suckling infant were in the house. Elizabeth was alarmed by a dog barking and saw 7 frightfully painted Indians come running through the farmyard, and she barred the door to the cabin shut. The Indian tried unsuccessfully to knock the door down, and failing, that Binge demanded that she open it. When she did not do so, they fired twice at it, with 1 ball piercing the door, but doing no damage. Elizabeth then took her husband's double-triggered rifle down, and for a time fumbled with the mechanism before she too fired blindly through the door. The Indians backed off a little and then set fire to an adjoining old house. After enduring the smoke as long as she and her children could, Elizabeth opened the door and came out. The Indians thought that a man had fired the shot from within the house and were afraid to enter, and let it burn down instead. Elizabeth was glad to see her possessions go up in smoke rather than to see the Indians have them. Binge and his war party tomahawked Sarah in her garden. She took 4 days to die. Also tomahawked were 1 white child and 2 colored, one of whom was killed but the other recovered. The Indians rounded up the remainder, which were Elizabeth, the 3 children who had been with her in the house, Susanna, 2 Negro men, and 1 colored woman. Elizabeth handed her infant to her 10-year-old and whispered to her to take it, and her 2-year-old to the nearest neighbors, John and Rachel Russell. Rachel was the sister of Vincent Hobbs Jr. It seemed that the Indians were content to allow the children to slip off. It was so uncharacteristic of all of the past behavior of Binge and his braves. Let's see, I want to go on now. The Indians made backpacks with their plunder, and the party started off. Binge and his captives crossed the North Fork of the Holston and marched westward to just east of Hilton. This was a circuitous route, but the direct passage through Fugate Gap would have led them by Houston Fort on Big Moccasin Creek. Oh, let's go on down. Ben's plans were thwarted when the Indians discovered a large party of settlers gathered at a house raising. He would go on, they would go through the hills, Holston Hill. Now, when Peter and Henry discovered that their wives were gone, the children gone, the mother had been attacked, they joined a militia party led by an officer named Head and started in direct pursuit of Benj, while a dispatch rider named John Henderson started off to Yoakum Station. Okay, they're out to find their family. Before daylight on the 7th, John Henderson rode up to the garrison at Yoakum Station and alerted the Rangers. Court was being held, so many of the militiamen were already there. After daybreak, the Benj party left their camp at Copper Creek and started up Copper Ridge. Okay, the Holston militia is following or trying to follow the trail. No one would have even known where they had passed but for a little girl. Eliza Jane Addington lived on the Clinch near the mouth of Benj's Creek. She saw a wet moccasin print on a stone in the creek and alerted the militia. The head party had been scouring countryside looking for some sign to indicate which way Benj had gone. The process of putting them onto the trail took much of the remainder of the day. Oh, let's see. The hard marching party of militiamen from Benham Fort arrived at Yoakum Station and coordinated their plans with the Lee County militia. Now I want to go on over. I want to get to the end of the trail. They are traveling through the hills for about 4 days, and Elizabeth was 8 months pregnant. On the morning of the 8th, Benj allowed his party to rest until the sun was more than an hour high. He no longer felt himself to be in danger and traveled slowly down the spine of Little Stone Mountain from where it attached itself to Powell Mountain at High Knob. Before I go on, you need to know, the story of Daniel Boone's son, James, how he and his friend were attacked in the woods and bodies were slaughtered. This was done by Benj and his tribe. So you can see how serious the situations were. Okay. Benj and his party camped near the northern foot of Powell Mountain. Here the trail split, with the eastern trail passing through Benj's Gap. With Benj's Gap in Little Black Mountain, that is now called Morris's Gap, so forth and so on. They're following this tribe of 8 Indians and the captives that they have with them. And they finally get on the morning of the 9th, the Benj party with its captives set out in single file on the trail that led to Big Stone Gap. Benj, following his well-known custom, was in front, preceded only by Susanna Livington. Another Indian with Elizabeth Livington brought up the rear, and the other Indians with their captives were strung out in between. Unknown to Binge, the head party of Holston militia, with the frantic Livingston brothers among them, was charging after them, only 5 or 10 minutes behind them on the trail. Undoubtedly, the head party were encouraged to great effort because of their having seen the signs left by the Indians' recent passage. Also unknown to the Indians, the Russell County militia with Binge's half-brother, Captain William Dorton, had slipped ahead of the colliding enemies only a few miles to the northeast in their passage up Guest River on the way to head the Indians at the upper Kentucky River. At first light, the Hobbs militia had plunged up the trail traveled the day before by Binge's 2 hunters. They gained altitude on Little Stone Mountain by going up Bend Branch. It goes on and on. Let's see. The militia soon saw the Indian party struggling up the spur of Little Stone Mountain. Oh, that's not a good position. Climbing up out of Hoot Owl Hollow toward Little Stone Gap, burdened by their plunder. Sure enough, Binge was in front, preceded only by Susanna Livingston. That's my 3rd grade aunt. The 2 parties came exactly opposite each other when John Vanbever raised his head to see if it was time for him to shoot. Binge spotted him not 40 yards away and threw off his pack and turned to run back down the trail. Vanbever fired at him and missed. Hobbs leveled his 20-pound bear rifle at a break in the trees where Binge must pass, and swinging his flintlock with his quarry and allowing for the 2-second delay in firing between the time he squeezed the trigger and the time it fired, he shot at the cross in Binge's suspenders as he flashed past the opening. At the moment of the shot, Binge stepped into a hole created by the roots of a tree that had fallen down, and Hobbs' 1-ounce lead ball passed through his head. Binge always carried a silver drinking cup on a rawhide string tied around his neck. As he stepped into the hole, the cup flew up in front of his head and was splattered with his brains. The Indian in the rear, immediately upon hearing the shooting, ordered Elizabeth Livingston to run, and when she turned, he tried to tomahawk her. She struggled mightily, defending herself against the blows with her arms, which became badly cut. Now remember, she was 8 months pregnant. James Huff rushed toward the struggle and started to shoot, but another militiaman grabbed his rifle barrel to keep him from shooting Elizabeth. Huff dropped his rifle and took his butcher knife and lunged after the Indian. The Indian tomahawked Elizabeth a glancing blow on the head as she stumbled over a fallen tree, and she fell unconscious. The Indian made a dash for the laurel thicket, and another militiaman discharged his rifle into his back, leaving him to crawl off into the thicket to bleed to death. That's all I'm going to read, except to say that later, Colonel Campbell of the Holston militia wrote to the governor requesting that a company of militia under Captain Lewis be assigned to guard Moxon Gap because of intelligence that Benj's uncle Doublehead and 30 warriors were coming on the warpath to take revenge in Virginia. Nothing came of it. The story ends with a cover letter from Colonel Arthur Campbell to the governor of Virginia. It was dated April 15th, 1794. Accompanying this report of the raid based on Elizabeth Livingston's narrative. She tells the entire story about their capture from the moment the Indians came on their property and they were rescued. Let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to read there. The story ends with a cover letter from Colonel Arthur Campbell to the governor of Virginia, dated April 15, 1794. Accompanying the report was the raid based on Elizabeth Livingston narrative. Okay. I now sent the scalp of Captain Benj, that noted murderer, as requested by Lieutenant Hobbs, to your excellency as a proof that he is no more, and of the activity and good conduct of Lieutenant Hobbs in killing him and relieving the prisoners. Could it be spared from our treasury, I would beg leave to hint that a present of a neat rifle to Mr. Hobbs would be accepted as a reward for his late services, and the executive may rest assured that it would serve as a stimulus for future exertions against the enemy. The governor heeded this advice, and Lieutenant Vincent Hobbs did receive this rifle. Chief Bob Benj's adult life began and ended with the Great Cherokee War of 1776 through 1794. Governor Blunt of Tennessee claimed that Benj had personally killed between 40 and 50 people. No other person exemplifies the pathos of this chapter in American history better than he and his kin, both white and red. May they all rest in peace. Now that's just a portion of this book and all of the raids by the Indian chief Bob Benj, red-headed Indian. If you're interested in the Cherokee history, you might be interested in this book. I looked and I saw that you can order it on Amazon. And the book was written by Lawrence Fleenor, F-L-E-E-N-O-R. He's the man I talked to about my great aunt. So he has written this book and other books which I have not seen. But I find this a very interesting book if you're wanting to learn about the Indian and the white man in the territory of North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. There's some very interesting stories. Now, my great-grandmother, Mary Nevels, Mary Sutton Nevels, was of Cherokee heritage. So there's a little bit of Cherokee Indian in my blood too. And of course, all of this took place long before the Trail of Tears, which came about 30 years later. And I think there's mention of the Trail of Trail of Tears in the book. Not much. But it goes from one farm, one plantation to another. It tells about the different families. It tells about the Indian families. And there are a lot of black and white pictures of people. It also has Sequoyah. Sequoyah, as you know, was the Indian that wrote the Indian alphabet, Cherokee Indian alphabet. And I think from what I've done in my research, my family heritage goes all the way back to Sequoyah. I can't prove it, but from the going back generation by generation, yes, I think Sequoyah is in my line of Indian. So, if you like this story, there are more, and I just suggest you order the book. It's a good book to have on hand because it's all true. Everything in this book is true, and it gives you a little background. If you've got teenagers who know nothing about life back in the 1700s, early 1800s, the connection between the Indians and the Caucasian people who come from other countries, it's a good book for them to read. It gives them a little insight as to their own background, their own history. And especially if they live in the Appalachian area, the mountains, the rivers, the woods. Much of what I read here, I recognize. I know the Clinch River. I know the Holston Hills. I know the Cumberland Gap. Of course, the hills of Virginia, where my parents were raised. So I like knowing these things, learning what life was like for my ancestors. So that's my story for today. This is my Labor Day treat. I don't know where everybody else is this Labor Day and how they're celebrating, but if you want to come on over, I've already got the table set, and I made chicken salad today, and I will tell you, I make good chicken salad. I can fix us a pot of tea in that pretty teapot, and we'll use paper napkins. I won't let you use my pretty new embroidered napkin. That's a no-no. But I would enjoy your company, and you'd be more than welcome to come. And we just have to forget the wine. I don't have any on hand, but I think there'd be a store or two open where you could pick up a bottle of wine if you like. Come on over, and we'll just sit and chat. I hope you have a good Labor Day weekend, and be careful on the highway. Just don't get out there unless you absolutely have to. So, that's it for today. And let me know what you think. I always want to hear from you. Bye-bye.